Joining us now to talk about what this means for Canadians is economist and director of the Centre for Future Work, Jim Stanford. Jim, here in Canada, we have also seen rate hike after rate hike. Do you think we're in for a few more, especially if our economy mimics what is happening in the U.S.?
I think they're less likely in Canada, Kelly, than we're likely to see in the U.S. Our economy has already weakened quite a bit. In fact, as of December, our GDP began shrinking, which means the recession that many economists fear could have already started. And that is very different than the US, where the growth remains fairly strong. So it's quite possible we'll see the Bank of Canada hold off on further interest rate hikes, at least for a while, and see how the economy unfolds here in Canada. It's good news in the sense that at least they're not making matters worse. But the reality is the interest rate hikes that we have had, we've had 8 of them in Canada in the last year, are really squeezing Canadians. Anyone with a mortgage that's variable rate is already paying hundreds of dollars extra a month. And where did they get the hundreds of dollars? It means they're not spending it on food, on clothing, on other things that consumers want to buy. And that's why the economy is slowing down, possibly even shrinking. So, it's good news in the sense that you don't bang your head against the wall any further.
How much longer do you think it will take in Canada for inflation to get back to a more sustainable level? Are we talking months or years?
The problem is that the inflation we've experienced since COVID had very little to do with what was going on in Canada's economy. Most of it was the result of international supply chain disruptions, shortages of things like semiconductors and building products and so on that were all imported. Then, of course, the war in Ukraine and the impact on energy prices and some food prices. So the domestic interest rate has very, very little impact on any of those factors. Now, some of those problems are working their way through of their own accord, not because of higher interest rates at home. So I think we will see a bit of relief on the inflation front, but I don't think that alone will bring inflation back to 2% where the Bank of Canada wants to see it. So it's quite possible, despite the economic weakness we're seeing, perhaps later this spring, the Bank of Canada will even increase interest rates again, and that will worsen the pain on Canadian households. Well, it's come from 8% at peak, that was last June, to just under 6% year over year today. And that progress was mostly due to lower energy and gasoline prices. The interest rates are having some impact in some areas of the economy. Housing prices, for example, are falling. But the charges for debt payment are rising and rents are rising. Rents are skyrocketing, in part because more people can't afford to buy a house. So even in the overall component, we haven't seen any benefit yet from higher interest rates. So altogether, it's not clear that the higher interest rates are having any impact at all, other than slowing down the economy and causing a lot of pain in Canadian households.
And you briefly touched on it, but last year we heard over and over again that Canada was due for a recession this year. Do you think that's on the horizon?
We have seen some, I think, concerning signals from the latest data, particularly in terms of GDP. On the other hand, we've had stronger job creation numbers than any of us expected. So it's hard to read the tea leaves right now, Kelly. There's some good news in there, some bad news in there. But the reality is these interest rate hikes are going to have a chilling effect. It takes time for them to be felt. So there's more bad news ahead than good news, I worry.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jim.
My pleasure, Kelly. Thanks for having me.